Welcome everybody, this is exciting. Today here on Red G Fox, we are an episode breakdown and this is a very, very happy moment. I love this episode. Now before I get to that, I just want to say, as I check, it's a very small channel, right? My goal, it's crazy, but I want to get to 100,000 subscribers. I want to be up there where we have so much time where we spread the word about Sanford and Son. And whether you like this video, the fun facts, the quizzes, the polls, the shorts I put up, whatever it is, if you enjoy anything on this channel, please share it with others. Please subscribe because I want to get our subscribers up. I want to talk more Sanford and Son. I love the comments. I love chatting with everybody. And I love learning things and teaching things. And it goes both ways. So please, if you enjoy anything on our channel, click the like button, click the subscribe button, and get ready for some fun stuff because this is going to be here for several years, just do an episode breakdown. My goal is, eventually I want to do Sanford and do other shows that Red Fox stood in, or starred in. So let's go. That's how excited I am. I'm so pumped for this episode. Now, today we are talking about the greatest. Now, it was one of the best voted episodes ever and in the top 10 all time in our list, and that is Coffins for Sale. In this one, we get the introduction of Slappy, Melvin, White, and you just get, I have a top 5 funny, and this one is like top 10, top 15 funny. There are so many things that have you busting out. This is probably, if I would say, season 1 episodes. We went over last week, Sanford Siege, where they were trapped in. That one was great. That one was great. But none of them up to this point have been. This is like the breakout episode, in my opinion. If I started on the first episode and reached this one, this is the new heights. So as we get into, we see Fred, and he's got his beret on, and he's hanging out, and he's coordinating, right? He's getting everything done. And Lamont comes home, and Lamont's like, he sees the hat. What are you doing with that thing? And Fred basically like, hey, you know what? This is my World War I. And he says, World War I. And he starts talking about the infantry he served in, and it was Blackjack Persian. And then he was white, but they called him Blackjack because of the gummy chew. I mean, this whole scene is top 5 funny. This is a top 5 funny when he breaks it down with the war. And the might say, oh yeah, World War I, huh? He said, you were 11 years old in World War I. He said, what did you serve? Would they give you a BB gun? and then of course Fred caught in a lie. He's like, oh, did I say World War I? I meant World War II. General Patton, old blood and guts. And he's like, what'd they call you? No gut, all blood, or I can't remember. Anyways, it was funnier than heck. The back and forth through there, and as he sits there and mentions what he served and how he had a scar, he got the scar on the side, and it's from the army from an appendix removal. So all this, and then the beret he got the Purple Heart that he won in a poker contest, and the beret he got at some garage sale. So secondhand store. It was nothing. So it was all Fred being Fred, and he did actually serve. He did volunteer and served in the army, which is ironic because if you know anything about Red Fox, he did avoid his service when he got called into the draft. But that was great opening scene as we go back and forth. So they go out of the truck, and Fred has no idea what they bought. And he's like, hey, let's go. And he whips it off, and when he sees it, Fred whips out the old heart attack, and then he's like, you know what, I'm coming, Elizabeth. And he's on, I got a wooden overcoat. He's already got what he's going to take to get buried in right there. And Lamont's like, will you stop overreacting? So they go to carry him in, and Fred's like, I'm not carrying it in first. I'm not. And so Lamont's like, all right, I'll go in first. So he goes, and Fred, 100% superstitious, and he's showing that. And they portrayed it in the episode and in past times too, how Fred is superstitious. And then they go and they get the coffin, and he's still furious. Fred does not want these here. He doesn't care if you make, Lamont is like, hey, we can make a killing. We can 100% profit on this. He bought him for 25. We could probably make 125, maybe even 100. We can make big money on this. And you see that a lot, especially in season 1 where Lamont is business savvy. But Fred wants no part of it. He doesn't want him in there. And as he's about to carry him, Fred's like, I'm not going in first, I told you. And Lamont's like, oh, didn't you hear that one where the second time through you go feet first? He just makes up some random thing. And you can see the expression on Lamont's face. And Fred's like, yeah, oh yeah. So they go to take it in. And as they carry it inside, he's like, see, I caught you. I just made that up and you believe any old dumb superstition. And as they're doing all that talk, and he had talked about the army, another top 5 funny that I just passed up I want to cover is when he's talking about, hey, I served, and he's like, I could have been in the Air Force. And he's like, I could have been a gunner. And he's like, well, why weren't you in the Air Force? And he's all, I'm not sitting in the back. I'm not sitting in the back of no plane. Brilliant, Fred, great line. So they're all done with that, and now they're sitting there, and Fred's not having it. He's sitting down, and he's like, we're not keeping these. And he's like, I can't. all the superstitious things, talking about the pigeons on the roof and their neighbor who passed away, right? That was a sign. And Lamont's like, she was 97 years old. And why did it doesn't make sense for Fred, who's superstitious, to have these things in his house. And Lamont's like, don't worry, these will be gone quick. If not, he starts talking about making them into matching end tables. I'm not superstitious, slightly, and I'm not even touching that going there. So, or even sofas. Gets a knock at the door, and it is the great Nelson B. Davis. We see him 2 times in this season. He comes back another time. We'll cover that later. Maybe not even in this episode, but he does make another appearance. We will cover more on Nelson B. Davis, the actor, in our Familiar Faces part of the show. So he comes in and he's great. He shakes the hands and he's got cold hands and he's like, I'm sorry, cold hands, warm chapel. And it's one of the jokes. And Fred wants none of it. And he's like, yeah. You think Fred would be excited? The superstitious part kicks in, but you think Fred would be like, yes, sell him, get him out of here. So he goes over it and he checks him out and he's looking at the coffins and Lamont's like, okay, what are we looking at? He'd like $100. And he's like, no. And they're haggling back and forth. And he offers 30. And Lamont could have made, that's not much of a profit. He said, Fred's all over it. Lamont says no. And he takes off. He said, sorry, I got to go. And he's got Nelson B. Davis. I think he's a great character for only 2 episodes. He's got a great smile. His reaction, his demeanor is very calm. Very good for an Undertaker character. So he leaves. And now Fred is upset. Why didn't you sell him? Why didn't you make him? And Lamont's like, I didn't buy these to make a $5 profit. I want way more than this. So as they're talking, they're sitting there and Fred is not happy. There's another knock at the door. And then in comes, and Fred opens it up. And Lamont's thinking, hey, more customers. I told you we're going to sell these things. And in comes Melvin, Slappy White, the actor. And then Melvin comes in. It's our first introduction. It's a top 5 funny. One of my favorite character introductions in show history. We've seen them all, right? The first time appearances. None, in my opinion, have ever made me laugh this much as when he walks in. He's like, hey, Lamont. Hey, hi, Fred. Goodbye, Lamont. Goodbye, Fred. And he just walks right out when he sees the coffins because he's superstitious as well. And Fred jumps up and he's like, hey, get back here. And he tells Lamont, you big dummy. I love when he says big dummy. You big dummy, you're going to chase away all my friends. So it gets to that evening and they're still there. And now Fred comes down. He's like, I'm not sleeping in here. And he's got a blanket. He's got the pillows. Which is still kind of scary, seeing how the neighborhood, he always says it's not the safest. I doubt someone's going to come out and just attack an old man sitting in the back of the truck. But still, Fred's always worried about someone breaking in. Maybe it's safer, hide in the back of the truck. If someone breaks in, which we've seen in other episodes, they're not going to do nothing to Fred because he's outside asleep. But he goes to get out there, and Lamont's like, and I love when Lamont does this. You hear it a lot in the first season, but he's like, you're ridiculous. This is ridiculous. He uses that constantly. And he tells Fred, you can't be ridiculous. Don't be sleeping out there. And then Fred makes a great point when he's like, hey, that tells the story of the guy who had coffins in there and he had gray hair. And he's like, nobody look, you can look good in gray hair. He's like Jackie Robinson looks good in gray hair. So it's funny because when he goes outside, Lamont's like, come on, come back in. He's like, no, he said, well, I'm sleeping in here. And he's all right, good night, Jackie. He calls for Lamont Jackie. And so Lamont goes back inside. And now Lamont, it's so funny because it's like this sometimes to where people's superstition or even fears can rub off on others, right? You act hysterical, your friend can be hysterical, your mom can be hysterical, whatever. So now Lamont he's fighting it. He's going, this is so stupid. This is nothing. This is ridiculous. So he turns off the light and then he hears the cat noise and comes down and gets nervous and he goes back outside. And, oh, I'm sorry. I got to go back. I forgot. Right before all this, Melvin comes back, right? How did I forget? I'm so excited getting to the part where he's on the truck. Melvin comes back right before he sleeps outside. And Melvin comes and he's like, I ain't coming inside. And Lamont's like, you two superstitious old men. So Fred comes outside. And another top 5 funny is when Melvin's like, well, why'd you let him buy those? And he's like, I don't know. Do you know anyone who wants them? And he goes, I got to get it exactly right. He's if he could use it, he's no longer around. And if he's around, he doesn't need to use it. The way Melvin delivers it is word for word perfect. And he delivers it, he's just so nonchalant. So it's a great line. That's a top 5 funny. And Fred is like, yeah, it makes a great point. And then they both start saying, I'm not superstitious, but I'm not going back in there. And then he's like, well, it's probably going to rain. He said, well, how can you tell? Because he's got a twitch in his eye and Fred's corns are bugging him. So all these little knick-knack things that are bugging him, their twitches, are supposed to be telling him things about the weather or the signs or an earthquake or something crazy happening. And he had to hurry up and get home, so he takes off. Now we're back to where they're outside. And Lamont, every time he goes up to the house, right, a cat gets in and you hear wow, the cats are crying. And he comes back down and then he turns on the light and goes and looks outside. And the best, probably There's two lines that are my absolute favorite in this scene, but the whole scene is great. All of it is top 5 funny over and over. It's all a bunch of quotes. But when he comes out and he tries to sneak around the truck and he gets on the other side of the truck and he bangs like a couple pots or cans and they fall over and Fred jumps up and he's looking around and Fred naturally is looking what's going on in front of me. And Lamont puts his hand on Fred's shoulder and Fred just, it's so good, dude. That is top. That is comedy gold. The writing, I mean, and this is like over and over in this episode where you're constantly busting up laughing. But he scares the heck out of him. And Lamont keeps trying to convince him, hey, let's go back inside. And he's like, I'm not going back in there. Good night. Good night. And he lays back down and Lamont goes back in again. And this time he turns off the lights. And as he leaves and he should have just went up to his room. As he goes out of sight, he hears a cat noise and he comes back down and now the lights won't turn on. So he goes out there and talks to him again, and he's bugging Fred. He puts his hand on his hand to touch him, and Fred opens it. And you feel so bad for Fred because he has to keep waking up. And I've been that. If you've ever been in that where you're actually drowsy and you're almost out, and then your son will say something like good night or something to you, and it wakes you back up, and you're like, oh my gosh, I was almost out. Why'd you do that? And this happens over and over to Fred, and he's like, well, go put a fuse in. And Lamont's like, yeah, I'll put a fuse. Either way, it happens again, and finally Lamont comes out. And he's like, look, I can't leave you outside. This is not safe. Will you stop? And he's like, I'll sell the Coffins tomorrow morning. They'll be out of here. And he's like, okay, I'll see you tomorrow morning. And Fred goes to attempt to go back to sleep. And he's like, what about your arthritis? Pop, your arthritis, it's going to make you, all stiff and crippled. And he's like, well, that'll be perfect. He's like, I'll be a cripple from the neck down, and you'll be a matching set because you're a cripple from the neck up. And Lamont just stares at him and he's like, that's it. And then he pulls and he does this where he's just like, that's it. You know what? Your stupidity, I'm going to have to sacrifice for your stupidity. And he's like, I can't do it. I'm not leaving you out here alone. It's not safe. And he climbs in and they're going back and forth, pulling the blanket to the pillow, to the blanket to the pillow. And then finally, Fred's like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And he's like, you're ridiculous. I'm ridiculous. This whole thing's ridiculous. And so they go back inside and go to sleep. And he's like, don't be ridiculous. I love Lamont saying, don't be ridiculous. And anytime Fred says, you big dummy. So they go back to sleep and Lamont's talking to himself, basically saying, hey, I'm going to get rid of him. You know what? You're scared. I feel bad for you, so I'll stay out here. It's okay if you're scared. It's okay. You don't have to be, there's no shame in it when we know Lamont's really scared. So he does sell him for $25 the next day to Nelson B. Davis. And everything's good, and they friendly goodbye. And when the Undertaker leaves, he forgets the hat, and Fred sees it. After he just gave Lamont a speech saying, hey, that's in your head. I ain't superstitious. I'm cool, man. I got nothing. And he's like, oh, no. When he sees that sitting on the table, he's all, the Undertaker, he left his hat on here. And he runs outside with the blankets. He's like, I'm going to check the roof for pigeons. And when he goes, Lamont wants to run after him, just say, but Lamont almost has a fearful to where he grabs the hat and he double checks and he runs real quick. It's a great ending. And that's it. That is the episode for Coffins for Sale in a nutshell. 1,000 times better on the actual episode and how funny it is. I'm pretty sure you've seen it. If you watch any of my shows and you've not seen the episodes, I would always say watch them first or watch a little bit to see what we think about it and then go watch them. Now, we've already covered a billion. This is probably my favorite joke when they're on the truck. I almost forgot. See, when I start playing the episode in my head, I forget some of the lines. Top 5 funny. There's a bunch of them. This one was probably my favorite, other than when he touches him and Fred just gets so scared, is when he comes out again and he says, hey, Pop, you awake? And when they're laying there and he's like, Fred's like, no, I'm checking my eyelids. I'm checking my eyelids for cracks, right? We've heard that. I'm checking the back of my eyelids for cracks. That's a saying that I heard growing up as a kid, but this is the first time it's ever been that I can go back and actually hear it when Fred brings it up and says, I'm checking my eyelids for cracks. Great line. Well delivered by Red Fox, and that's another top 5. Like I said, this probably had about top 15, top 10 funny. It had so much great stuff, yet the story was still top notch. It was still of interest. It wasn't a bunch of one-liners that didn't apply or just a bunch of, hey, you're a dummy, big dummy, cold-blooded dummy or something like that. But that's it. So now let's get to our fun facts on this episode. Fun facts. Did you notice Fred wears a beret for the big first half of it? In only about 4 other episodes, 3 to 4, he's worn a beret. I think he looks really young in it, so maybe that's why they try to stay away from it. I don't know. Not that he's going to walk around all the time like Rerun from What's Happening. But he wears it in the episode where he makes the junk tower. He wears it in the episode where he's trying to go undercover to follow Lamont. right? When he's on his date with Julio's sister, he wears it. I think there was 2 more. There's another one he wears it where he goes on that date with multiple women and he has to act like a Frenchman. The French bread. Oh, I can't wait to get to some of these episodes on our show. And I thought there was one more time. But either way, yeah, I thought it was 4. I might have missed one. But he wears a beret, and just a fun fact there. Fred says, oh, and this is one where Fred actually starts to kind of break, where he doesn't break, bust up laughing like the few episodes, but when he says about the Coffins, when Lamonts first bring him in the house, he's over my dead body, and then Lamont's like, well, that's one we just sold. And then you can see Fred, it's not a little sarcastic laugh, he actually starts to laugh somewhere. He's trying to hold it in and he's cracking up a laugh. So watch for that. When you hear him say over my dead body, watch Fred's reaction. And when Lamont says, well, that's one, you can see him actually start to laugh. Other Fred fun fact, James Wheaton, that is the actor, we'll get to him, Familiar Faces, where he plays the funeral director, Nelson B. Davis. He's in the first season 2 times. Ironically, he is also in the exact same set, probably about 6 years later, in season 1 again of What's Happening. In that one, they're trying to rent out a room, and he comes in there and he's going to rent the room, and he's a real crabby guy, breaks the faucet and he gets wet, and then I can't remember, something happens and the water gets on him and he gets all upset, and Dee's like, goodbye, we don't want to rent it to you. But he's a complete opposite. In that one, he's a jerk and mean, and this one, he's very calm, docile, and funny. So yeah, that's another fun fact that he actually, it's not just that he returns from a different show, it's that the exact same set. I always think that's pretty ironic and funny. Lamont, now this one is where Lamont actually sells the coffin. Is it a fun fact? No, it's more of a, where maybe, it's just a point pointing out. Lamont sells the coffins when he could have actually got $30 instead of $25. He ends up losing a $5 profit, which is still pretty decent in those days back in the 70s, right? What is that? That might have been 12 packs of cigarettes Fred could have got in a previous episode where we talked about cigarette price in the 70s. But he ends up selling it for 25, breaking even. So that is it on the fun facts with that episode. There was one more. It was just more of an ironic, not a fun fact, but that year this episode was filmed, where Fred says, hey, Jackie Robinson looks good in white hair. In that same year, later on that year, Jackie Robinson actually passed away. So it was just an interesting fact that, hey, you talk about him, and then the same year he passes away in an episode about coffins and superstitions. I mean, if that was not Red Fox, but Fred Sanford, I promise you he would have said something about, see, I told you we talked about it, and it's coffins, and we brought up Jackie Robinson, and he passed away the same year. Only one other time I know in history, correct me if I'm wrong, Jackie Robinson is brought up, and that is the episode where Fred celebrates his anniversary, where they think Lamont stole the Frank Sinatra ring, the tiptoe burglar, and Fred acts like the tiptoe burglar. I think he's watching the Jackie Robinson story at the beginning when Rollo and Lamont come home and they get him a ball, which is spelled wrong, Jackie, and not the correct way, Jackie, the way Jackie Robinson spells it. So those are the fun facts for the episode. Let's get to Familiar Faces. I'm not going to say Melvin. We know that Melvin Slappy White, who he is. This is the only thing I know him from. I'm sure he's done other things. We did a breakdown on him before and some of the stuff he did, but I know him from Sanford and Son. This was James Wheaton. He did something called Gun Crazy. Some of these shows I'd never heard of. LA Heat, Kojak, I've heard of that, Kojak. What's Happening, I talked about how he was in the episode there. And I believe he was in the Jeffersons. Not sure if it's 1 or 2, if he had a few reoccurring appearances. But those are shows. He's also done a handful of other shows. I don't know if we would ever do a fun fact episode on Nelson B. Davis. I mean, we just did one recently on someone who's only been, 4 side characters and not very big roles. Nelson B. Davis probably had more screen time than he did, but just the fact that, Barry Wright. But I don't know if we'd ever do one on him, because it's like, how much else was he really in other than a bunch of side stuff? But that is a familiar face. If you have seen James Wheaton before, you probably recognize him outside of Sanford and Son in one of those shows listed. So that is it. That's the fun fact. Familiar faces, top 5 funny. Coffins for sale. Please tell me, what are your thoughts on Coffin for Sale? Is it your favorite? When we did a poll on my other family channel, it won season 1. It was up there. To me, Coffins for Sale, I really love also the Piano Movers. Those are probably my 2 favorite. It would be interesting. I might put that in a poll to see, ask everyone in the community. I can look for 4 episodes, but what would be the best out of Piano Movers because I feel like Piano Movers and this one, Coffins for Sale, were just so packed with comedy, great story, great acting, and just nonstop laughter as well. So give me what your thoughts are on it. Give a like, give a subscribe. Like I said, I need this channel to grow. I can't do it without you guys. Spread it, share it, get it out there. If you see people and other things where they're like, hey, I love Sanford and Son, I love quizzes, this is the place to send them, because you get more quizzes and polls here than any other channel, even the Sanford and Son official channel. They might get a couple here and there, but they don't get as many questions or polls on my two channels. You're going to get weekly and daily. So get the word out there, guys. Thanks a lot for watching. Talk to you guys later. Peace.